Welcome to Trini Ting, where we sit down with visionaries and voices who shape the spirit of Trinidad and Tobago. In part 3 of his 5-part Trini Ting interview, Jackie Hinkson reflects on the wisdom he would offer his younger self. He speaks candidly about his love for and the foundational role of drawing in his artistic practice. He also shares what he believes gives art its strength and talks about the use of signs and billboards in some of his paintings. If you were able to somehow speak to or send a message to your 18-year-old self, before you started painting seriously, what would that message say?
Well, first of all, 18 years old, as far as I'm concerned, I was painting seriously.
Okay, then before that.
What did I used to say to him? I said, well, just work, just work. I wouldn't give any, no, just work, that's all.
You wouldn't give any contrary advice?
No guiding, pushing in this direction or that direction, just work.
Yeah.
Perhaps I might say, do a lot of drawing. Draw all the time. I might say that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying then that, you draw a lot now, you sketch a lot. And is that, so that's something you picked up pretty late in your career, or?
Well, at university.
Okay.
At university. I wasn't aware of the significance of drawing in my teenage years. When I was looking at the works of, as I said, Atek and Chang and Aladdin and all of them, I wasn't aware of it. You never used to see, almost never used to see in those exhibitions any drawings. You just see the paintings.
Okay.
Now, it doesn't mean that those artists were not drawing. I'm sure Chang was doing a lot of drawing. Atek, I'm sure, was doing a lot of drawing. It's just that those were not shown.
All right.
So I wasn't conscious of the significance of the role of drawing. But when I went to university, courses started drawing. You have to draw, and that is when I realized not only how important it is, but how much I liked it. And I never stopped drawing since those days. I just draw all the time.
So you must have a huge storage area of sketch pads.
Yeah, thousands of drawings, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, plus others that probably got lost or destroyed and so on, Yeah.
Well, I'm sure we continue to benefit from that skill and that practice. Can you recall a particular piece of your art that you felt or that you feel is deeply misunderstood?
No, nothing as specific as that. What I can say is that through no fault of their own, the general public tends to focus on the surface story in the art or in the artwork. For example, these same murals that I put out at Carnival time, right. People come and they talk, oh yeah, look, that is when, the minister, the government, this, or that was when there was a fight between, this part of the society and that part, and so on. And they get excited about that anecdotal part of the thing. And what I keep telling them and I keep repeating is that isn't where my real focus is. Mm-hmm. My real focus is in the visual language of shape, tone, color, rhythm, the interrelationships, and how all of that works with the so-called story that you're seeing.
Right.
But without that basic, formal, structural part of the art, as far as I'm concerned, if that's not good, it's not good art, regardless of how exciting or entertaining or titillating the stories might be. But those stories will change. 20 years from now, nobody is going to have a clue about who Minister so-and-so was. And nobody would care.
But
so what is going to make that work sustainable as art?
Right, is those things that you said, you know, the whole juxtaposition of the colors and the tones and the light and all of that sort of
thing. And the quality of drawing, you know, that would stand up to time. I mean, I tell people, for example, I quote, there's a painting by Picasso called Guernica, which depicts the horror of war during the Spanish Civil War and so on. There's a painting by the Spanish artist Goya that depicts an execution, and several others. And what makes those works powerful works is not the fact that these artists were saying war is terrible. We all know that. I know that, you know that, everybody knows. So what will make the work enduring and universal is if in the handling of the visual language you give this thing a permanence, a monumentality in the compositional structure and so on.
I like that.
Only then would it become a permanently powerful work of art.
I like
not
that
the fact,
monumentality.
Yeah, not the fact that the artist is saying war is awful. We all know that.
Right. You know, and I guess that is an interesting point about how people consume art.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I guess the saying beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But at the end of the day, I guess it is, everybody will walk up to a piece of your art or any art and have their own interpretation that may not necessarily coincide with what the artist was intending to do.
Quite. I mean, I produce a series of paintings that I rightly or wrongly titled Christ in Trinidad. And in that series of paintings, I took stories from the Bible, well-known stories, a crucifixion, a this, a that, and I depicted them in a kind of local context. Yes. So the crucifixion takes place on an electric pole in the street, under which there's a fete sign advertising a big fete coming up. And in the background, the hills of Laventille, and a shed at the side of the road selling fruit, and a stray dog down below there, and so on. Now, what was I going to say? I was going to say that if that work is to stand up as something permanently of quality, it cannot be because it's a biblical story.
Okay.
It has to be something more than that. Maybe by putting it in a Trinidad context, I gave it a universality. I gave the story a universality that goes beyond the biblical time, you know?
Yeah.
So that it becomes a more universal theme, a subject.
But interestingly enough, I saw that painting in a picture just today, and I guess it also cites it in a Trinidad context. You know, as you put all those little features into it, as you say, the stray dog, the guy selling the fruit, the hills of Laventille.
Yeah.
You know, it was a very strong painting. It's a very strong painting.
Take your word for it.
As you mentioned the fete sign in that particular painting, one of the things I do notice is your use of signs in a lot of what you do on a local, you know, in those local depictions. Could you kind of explain, why is it? I mean, it's a central feature in a lot. I mean, I'm looking at one on the wall right here.
Yes.
It's very prevalent. And it's almost as if you pick them out, I don't know is there something conscious behind that?
I pick them out because they're in my landscape.
Right.
They're all around me. I'm driving up the highway and there are billboards after billboards after billboards. I go downtown and Mr. KFC is watching me and so on. So just as in the 19th century some French artists might be depicting, boats on the River Seine or something like that, my landscape has these billboards and those images and those colors in it. And I'm painting my landscape.
Okay.
And also it offers the opportunity to tell a story, because there may be a little commentary there, that a preoccupation with acquiring, with commerce, business. And that is like one of the driving forces in our society, the seduction of whether it is this rum or that, and so on. So there are all these underlying layers of stories coming through, plus my eternal focus on how to compose, where to put things, and so on.
And of course, all these things always have the human form in it.
Yeah.
Your work captures the Caribbean, and particularly Trinidad and Tobago, in ways that feel timeless. And if someone 100 years in the future were to look at your paintings, what do you hope they would understand about our lovely islands?
It's entirely up to them. I wouldn't know how to guess that, how to judge that, how to predict that. All I would hope is that apart from the story, the imagery, and so on, which they may or may not recognize, is that somehow in my tones, in my colors, in the role that the human figure plays in relationship to the surrounding landscape, that some universal, permanent story or emotion comes through that is valid, was valid when I did it, that is valid 100 years later when they're seeing it, and that will be valid 1,000 years later when somebody sees it. When I see a depiction of a mother and child by Raphael or Michelangelo or whoever, I don't have to be a deeply religious person, appreciative of Mary and baby Jesus. I don't have to be that. If Da Vinci has done a good work, a good thing with that work of art, that mother and child relationship would resonate with anyone 10 years later, 100 years later, 1,000 years later, 10,000 years later. And that is what I mean about bringing a universality to a work of art. When I see that there is, Michelangelo did a few pietas. This the dead Christ, I suppose, being held by the mother. The famous one in the Vatican everyone talks about, but there are others, and I've seen others, and he does them in such a way that when you're looking at it or at them, you're not thinking that is Mary and that is Jesus. No, what is coming through to you is the power of that eternal human story of death of a child and a mother relationship. with so on. That is the universality that he captured and others capture and others don't.
So would you say then that if you were to judge a piece of art, that would be one of the first qualities you would look at?
Oh yeah, yeah, or that you would feel. You know, you don't go looking for it, you know, you feel it. When anytime I go into a museum or an exhibition and so on, I never ask for a catalog. I don't want to know what the title of this is, what story is. I don't want to. I want to see the work, and I let that work sink into me. Afterwards, I might take the thing and say, oh, that's such a, but only after I have, you know, responded to that visual thing in front of me.
Next exhibition I go to, I'll try that. I'll try that approach.
Of course, the man in the street and so on who is not versed in studying art and so on may very well come before a painting and respond to it emotionally without being able to analyze what it is they're feeling or why and so on. But they would respond to it.